Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Come on in virtually. How's everybody doing? This is my favorite part of the job where I get to talk to an audience that I cannot see. So I hope everyone is having a great day today or a great afternoon if you are on the East Coast or in the Central Time Zone. You're ready for a great lunchtime hour if you're in the Pacific. My name is Jen Stojkovic. I am here to host today's conversation, Mapping the Tech Exodus. We're very excited to have an amazing speaker, Brian Moyer, joining from Nashville to talk about what is going on with the growing tech scene in Nashville, how it compares to San Francisco, and of course, does Nashville have what it takes to be the next SF? I think Brian's got some thoughts on that, so I look forward to learning more. First and foremost, I've got to do a few housekeeping notes because it is my job. So if you have a question for today's conversation, you see right below, there we go, right here, the Q&A tab. So that is where you can post questions during today's talk. So if you have any questions throughout the chat, we would really, really love for you to drop them there. And then when we get towards the end of the conversation today, we can take a look and get to as many questions as we can. I also will be sharing this entire recording out afterwards. So if you miss any amazing nuggets or any great pieces of statistics in today's conversation, don't worry, we will be sharing the entire event afterwards. Lastly, do you have thoughts on whether Nashville has what it takes to be the next SF? I have a feeling some of you do. So if so, please follow at sf.citi, sf.citi, and hashtag Tech Exodus to tag us on Twitter to share your thoughts for today's conversation. So with that being said, I would love to give you a little bit more details before we head into today's talk about what we are looking forward to in terms of next steps for the tech industry. So who is SF.citi? SF.citi is San Francisco's Tech Trade Association. So much like Brian is here representing Greater Nashville, we represent San Francisco's tech industry when it comes to all things government, community, and helping to build a better city for us all. We have created the San Francisco Tech Exodus dashboard. So you are going to see different facts and figures stated throughout today's conversation. If you want to go to the one-stop shop for all things resource-wise for the Tech Exodus, you can go to sf.citi.org/sf-tech-exodus. Don't worry, we will be sharing this in the chat, so you do not have to scramble to write this down. We have all the latest data on the SF Bay Area Tech Exodus, the impact of the exodus on San Francisco, the policy landscape fueling the tech exodus, and clues about where SF and the Bay Area might be moving. So what is the state of the tech industry in the San Francisco Bay Area? If you had asked me a year ago today, what is it like getting office space in San Francisco? I would tell you it may, in fact, be the hardest thing in the entire world in terms of the competitiveness of the landscape. You were looking at less than 3% of available office vacancy 1 year ago. Now we're at 17.8% office vacancy rate. To compare that to the dot-com bust, we were at 18%. So we are very, very close to hitting an all-time high for the city when it comes to empty skyscrapers. To give you an idea of what that looks like, we have the equivalent of more than 10 Salesforce towers currently on the market right now as we speak. Multiple San Francisco tech employers have announced that they are leasing or moving out of their headquarters. Some of the most recent ones include Yelp, who put their entire building up. Wish, Optimizely, you may have famously heard back in the summer, Pinterest paid almost $100 million to break a lease. There's also been similar announcements from other tech companies such as Twitter and other ones earlier on in the pandemic. So folks are dropping their lease space left and right. Salesforce, San Francisco's largest tech employer, employs over 10,000 employees in San Francisco, has announced the remote first policy. We have had more than 80,000 USPS address changes outside of San Francisco. The exact number is about 89,000. This is about 5 times the amount that we saw in 2019. We've also faced a 27% rent drop. The latest report from the LA Times just 2 days ago was showing that the median one bedroom in the city of San Francisco, I kid you not, was less than $2,000. So things are changing fast over here in SF. 63% of tech companies are planning to downsize in the Bay Area. We did our own survey a few weeks back, and we actually found that 36%, or more than 1/3 of all the tech companies we spoke to, anticipate 50 to 100% of their Bay Area workforce to remain remote. All of this backdrop is against a very troubling sign at the city of San Francisco, and that is we have more than a $400 million budget deficit predicted for 2021 to 2022. What's going on in Nashville? Well, it's a little bit different story. So Nashville in the last 5 years has seen a 36% tech job growth rate. So that is higher than the 23% national tech job growth rate, and 16% tech growth is predicted for 2019 to 2024. Another thing that's notable and very interesting about Nashville's tech workforce is that 1/3 of Nashville tech employees are women and 23% are BIPOC. So there's definitely a really interesting opportunity for folks that are looking to diversify their workforce, not in just gender and race, but also geography, political ideologies, and other things like that when it comes to moving outside of the Bay Area. That's one of the things that we've heard from a lot of founders in terms of the benefits of creating a remote workforce. We can talk a little bit more about that shortly. The cost of living in Nashville is 3.3% lower than the national average. The median rent of a one bed, just a tad over $1,000 a month. The median home value, $316,000. Nashville also ranked among the top 10 best performing cities. All right, everybody. So that concludes your quick lecture on all things tech exodus with San Francisco and Nashville's tech growth or bust. With that being said, I am going to administer our very first poll just to learn a little bit about who is joining us in the room. And while you fill out that poll, I will welcome Brian up to the stage. All right, Brian, welcome up. How's it going?
It's going well, and my camera switched, so hold on a second. Don't you hate it when that happens?
This is like very daunting view of you. Like you definitely look like the authority here.
Oh, goodness.
It's all right. You do a little switcheroo because we still have about 55% of folks to vote on our latest. All right, so we've got you back. Did you get a chance to vote, Brian? Let's take a look. What factors matter the most to you in choosing where to live? What's great about this poll is that we've actually administered it with each of the cities we've spoken to. So I'm curious to see if our Nashville folks feel a little different than our Seattle folks. All right. And we're going to end the poll and we will share out the results. Wow. Okay. So your preferred location and climate ranked at 47% today. I don't think we've had that one. I think everybody was looking for low cost of living and affordable housing last time. Are you surprised by any of these?
No.
No? You know your people. All right. So, Brian, how is it going? Welcome to our Mapping the Tech Exodus part 2 of this series. I'm really excited to have you because Nashville is a totally different picture than San Francisco. So this is going to be a very interesting conversation. Before we get started on painting a picture of what it looks like over there in Nashville, this is a reminder to folks. See that little Q&A tab? You're going to have questions throughout our conversation. Drop them in there. We'll get to as many as possible. Okay, now I've done my housekeeping. Brian, take it away. What was the stage for tech looking like before the pandemic?
Well, first, Jen, thank you for including Nashville and inviting me to participate in this. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. So what was the state just 1 year ago? Can you believe it was just 1 year ago before all this craziness started? So I think one word would be momentum. We came into 2020 with an incredible amount of momentum. I mean, we weren't unique to that, but it was just really highlighted in Nashville in terms of both general economic growth for the city, but also in terms of the tech sector. I mean, some examples. Polycom said we were the #1 metro for economic strength in 2020. And these 2020 figures all came from early in the year. Money Geek said we were the #1 city for job seekers. The Wall Street Journal said we were the #2 hottest job market in the country. So while we are admittedly a much smaller market, both in terms of overall population and in terms of the tech sector than a San Francisco or some of the other cities that we get compared to or compete against, we do have one of the fastest growing economies and one of the fastest growing tech sectors in the country. What we've seen specific to tech has been a steady stream of tech companies choosing to either pick up and move to Nashville or to expand to Nashville. And a lot of those are traditional West Coast companies. So it all started with Eventbrite several years ago, and then Lyft and House and Postmates and Winolo, and I've got a long list here. And then of course, the big announcement in 2019 that Amazon was opening a center of excellence here and bringing 5,000 jobs, the biggest economic development win in the history of the state of Tennessee with that announcement. So big news that really kind of got the attention of a lot of people at the time. Add to that, as far as momentum coming into the year, we'd had several recent tech IPOs. You know, for the West Coast, maybe this isn't a big deal. For us, this was a pretty big deal. One was a company, a local tech company here called i3 Verticals, Change Healthcare, Smile Direct Club, all within the past 2 years had IPOs. We saw a lot of increased investment in our local tech companies, a lot of announcements of series rounds that were being funded. And then, this is exciting to me, a growing list of really highly profitable tech exits. Local company here, EdgeNet, SaaS-based e-commerce that exited at $100 million. InterMedX, health tech at $460 million. Confirmation.com, fintech, exited at $450 million. STR, which is in the hospitality and analytics space, exited at $450 million. And you know, that's where the magic happens, is when you start building that wealth that gets invested back into the economy and the ecosystem. You mentioned some stats around our tech workforce, which is also one of the fastest growing in the nation. So to me, these are kind of the building blocks that are important to create a growing, thriving tech community. Talent, innovation, investment, and new wealth that's being created. And this doesn't happen overnight. This has been going on for years, long before I had a role as a community leader. This has been happening, and we're just now seeing the results of that. And one last point to make, because I think this is important. What I see as the real X factor that sets Nashville apart, it ties back to the iconic Music City brand that we're all known, that many people know Nashville for. For decades, literally, artists have been coming to Nashville with the dream of becoming the next music star. And if you think about that, it's, you know, they're risking everything for their dream, and it's a very entrepreneurial journey. And so that entrepreneurial mindset is just kind of baked into our DNA, and it has been for almost 100 years. And then you look at the similarities between the skill set required to be a successful musician versus the skill set required to be a successful software developer. And they're very similar. You know, I'm a product of that transformation, having gone from musician to self-taught programmer. And so I can tell you that that's really something that's special here. And so creative tech is something that we highlight. It's really not just a tagline. what sets us apart from other cities in the country.
I really love that analogy you've made, because we've had this conversation so many times in San Francisco, with elected officials saying, we're losing what makes San Francisco's culture San Francisco. And to us, we've always really seen the tech workers and the creators and the innovators. That's the new creative class. We are continuing the tradition of San Francisco and what it means to literally come from all across the world, right? 47% of all founders in the Bay Area are immigrants. So it is truly the place where people come from all over to just start. They just start something, they've got an idea, and they're trying to bring creativity to solutions. And I totally agree with you. And that's absolutely the same kind of vibe and culture that I think makes San Francisco attractive as well.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. So, okay, I want to get into the moving statistics, because you guys are in a very interesting position. So San Francisco, April or May, this time last year, I think you couldn't go down a single block without seeing a U-Haul. We're everywhere. It was very apparent to folks that people were leaving the city. Who knows how long, but they certainly were leaving. Now, at the same time as everyone was heading out of our city, you guys topped the list for U-Haul's national list of one-way moves for the first time for 2020, and you had a 12% jump in new arrivals. So our people are going somewhere, and apparently it might be Nashville. I'm very curious why on earth so many people are moving to Nashville, not just on the tech workforce side, but clearly lots of folks are gravitating to your area in a time when so many other cities are suffering a brain drain. What do you think that is?
I think there's a few factors, and of course that is Tennessee as a whole that study represented, and those people have been scattered throughout the state. But I think some things that are consistent across the state. You have to put no state income tax at the top of the list. I mean, that's huge, especially for people coming out of San Francisco or anywhere in California or New York for that matter, or Chicago. Affordable cost of living, comparatively speaking, very affordable cost of living. Great quality of life, excellent schools. Those are things that are consistent across the state. If you zero in a little more on what that looks like, maybe as far as attributes that the tech workers might see, I think in Nashville, a diverse array of tech job opportunities. So we certainly in music and entertainment to healthcare, we've got a growing fintech sector, we've got a growing renewable energy, logistics, and others. So there's a lot to choose from. That wasn't always the case, but that is the case now. We have a very vibrant startup scene. And again, I think that tracks back to the creative ecosystem that exists here that's been transformed into this startup scene. Very creative ecosystem. We've talked about, good nightlife, great food. The foodie thing seems to be brought up more often. I'm surprised by that. That's not high on my list of things, but boy, I hear a lot about that. People kind of say, wow, you've got a lot of really good restaurants here. And every time I come to town, there's a new one. A very insightful piece of feedback that we got from a recent techie that relocated here, where they said, Nashville not only offers a very vibrant tech ecosystem that you can get plugged into, but I feel like I can come there and really make a difference rather than just get lost, which might happen if I move to San Francisco or one of the other big cities. And I think that's a really huge thing to point out, that you can come here and make a difference.
Do you find that with some of the exits that you mentioned earlier, are those folks sticking around, or are they taking their money and hightailing it to Hawaii or Miami? Are they really staying to be the next big kind of VCs and investors in this space?
They are staying. I mean, not 100%, but for the most part, yeah. The ones that I mentioned, yes, and they are actively beginning to invest into that startup ecosystem, which is so important to see.
And how do you think that your healthcare industry? I was really surprised in doing some research for today's talk to learn that you guys have an $84 billion healthcare industry. I had no idea that you had such a big industry. How do you think that that is helping to anchor more companies to be moving in? One of the things that's really interesting about San Francisco is that we also have a huge healthcare industry. It's about tied for our #1 industry in the city. Most people think it's tech, but tech is actually our third biggest industry, with healthcare and tourism being 1 and 2, roughly the same size.
So I didn't know that. But let me give you a few more statistics around that. So actually, that global impact has grown to $92 billion. There's 17 publicly traded companies that are headquartered here, health companies. There's a total of 900 total companies working in healthcare, and that's all grown in support of that industry and those big publicly traded companies that are here. Actually, what I see from that is it provides a great stability. You know, people are always going to need healthcare. It's a very stable industry. I think it's one of several reasons, but an important reason why we were able to exit out of the recession of 2008, 2009 as quickly as we did, and as impressively as we did, was because of that foundational strength that we had with the healthcare sector. We see these companies being very supportive of our work in growing the tech sector. They're very willing to invest in that and support those efforts. That's a positive. They drive innovation and attract startups. You know, if that's what brought me to Nashville, was I had a startup that was focused on healthcare. I'm here because of the strength of that industry. And I've seen that story over and over and over again. So, and they employ a lot of tech workers. So I think, generally speaking, there's a lot of positives to that being, you know, the largest economic driver that we've got here.
Yeah, I mean, it creates that backbone infrastructure, right? And it's so resilient when it comes to that kind of boom and bust, particularly right now in this pandemic, right? Healthcare's not going anywhere. You know, there's a lot of industries that are fluctuating up and down, but to have, you know, healthcare or education, higher ed is another one where there's just really never going to be a downside. When the economy's bad, people go to school. When the economy's good, people go to school.
Yeah, and go ahead.
No, you continue. I'd love to hear more thoughts on it.
Well, one of your follow-ups here was, are there any downsides to that? And really, you know, the only thing I can think of is, once people understand the strength of healthcare, I mean, you didn't realize that, and a lot of people don't. We'll talk about that specific curiosity with our population here in just a second, but I wouldn't want somebody, once they learned that, to think that healthcare is all there is. That if they move to healthcare, it has to be to pursue a career in healthcare. Certainly you have those opportunities, but that is not the only thing that you have. And in fact, a recent Milken Institute study that was just published this week, I think, or late last week, where they ranked Nashville as number 8 in the country as far as best performing cities. One of their recommendations in that study is that we need to grow more high-tech industries to supplement what's already here. You know, not necessarily critical, Nashville's doing great, but one of the things that they're recommending that could be done to improve our position would be to diversify that some.
Yep. I mean, that does become one of the issues. And that's one of the issues that we're facing right now in the city of San Francisco, is we've become reliant upon, you know, the business industry. There's very high business tax rates. We also have a hotel tax because, as I said, tourism is such a huge revenue driver for our city, partly because of the precarious tax situation that California has when it comes to property taxes and the way that you're able to diversify your tax base. And so what we've had happen in this pandemic is 2 of those industries where we really rely on that revenue have been hit. You know, hotel taxes went to nothing. And tech really had steep declines for quite some time. Back in June, we had some companies like Lyft and Airbnb laying off upwards of 25% of their workforce. So there really was some true downturns in both industries at the same time. And so that really brings, you know, your point to light, that if we don't have a diversified tax base, which is diversified industries, what do we do when there's a downturn that hits one of them, worst case scenario, 2 or more?
Yeah, it's very important. And actually, with the strength that healthcare has, one of the things that we talk about from another perspective, just in terms of the number of companies. I mean, there's close to 60,000 different businesses. 900 of those are focused on healthcare. So a big percentage in terms of dollars of our economy, but in terms of the number of companies and the types of companies that are here, it's very diversified. And another one of the things that I think adds to a lot of the stability that we have here.
Yeah. All right. So just a reminder to everyone, drop questions in the Q&A tab. I see a few of them are starting to fill in, but please, as you have piqued curiosity about what Brian and I discussed, please drop your questions in. Now, I want to get to one of my favorite conversation points, taxes. Let's talk about taxes. All right. So I don't think there's two states that could be more night and day when it comes to their tax policy. And we can get into that, you know, a little deeper on both sides. But, you know, talk to me a little bit about what does the business tax situation look like in Nashville and in Tennessee, and how does that contrast to what we're seeing in the Bay Area or California?
So we are regularly listed as one of the lowest cost places to do business in the nation. I think we're like fourth from the bottom as far as overall cost of taxes for doing business here.
Okay.
And so
who's the top, who's the bottom?
I don't remember who that was, but and of course that's statewide. Maybe Louisiana. You know, some of the other southern states were on that list. We've been very fortunate for the past 30 years. Just talking the city of Nashville, we've had a series of mayors, all Democrat, but who have all been very pro-business. It's just been this consistent mindset that that's what drives the economy, and it's important that we take care of our business. As you know, Nashville's a blue dot in a red state, and that's where a lot of the state policies come from. It's a very conservative approach to doing business and to taxes and to keeping the size of government low so that you can keep your tax base low. I really don't see that changing. I will say that late last year, December, there was a new property tax increase that was enacted, and it was fairly substantial. It was a 34% increase in property taxes, and that was to help shore up some finances around the city that needed to take place. But even after that, Nashville is still right in line with the other major cities and counties, large counties in the state, and it is highly competitive, again, towards the bottom of the list still, as far as overall tax burden of other major cities across the country. So, you know, there will be some increases where they're needed. That's very unusual to see. I don't know, I think it was 2012 or something like that since the property tax rates had been adjusted. So it'd been a long time coming for that. But generally speaking, the theory is that we want to keep things affordable. We want to attract business because that's what's going to drive the economy.
So we have had a very interesting past 10 or 15 years in San Francisco when it comes to the approach towards growing tech, right? So back in 2011, we had a mayor that was really, really set on creating the recovery of the city because our city was hit really bad in 2008, as you can imagine, right? All cities were, but particularly San Francisco had quite a deficit to fill. And so what we did as a city is we decided to create a number of different changes to our tax system and created different incentives to move the tech industry into the city. Because at the time, in 2011, we were looking at a double-digit unemployment rate. Seems crazy to think of now, to think that a city last year had upwards of a 2.7, 2.8% unemployment rate, right? Which is functionally a fully employed city, but we had double-digit unemployment not that long ago. And so our thoughts around that were, we need to bring more jobs to the city. We need to bring high-skilled jobs. We need to find ways to revitalize parts of our city that were really starting to crumble. A great example is the South of Market. As I'm sure you've probably seen, that's where Twitter and many of those companies ended up locating, many of the post-2008 companies. And now we have really changed our tune towards those incentives, and we've really changed whether we want those companies to be in that space. And we have a very different leadership mindset coming from our city leadership, not our mayor, but from some of our city supervisors. And now you're seeing all those offices that we built back in 2011, 2012, they're all getting leased. And we're just in this position where we could end up going back into that exact same spot that we were at before and really just undo a decade's worth of progress.
Wow.
Yeah, it's the tax situation in San Francisco, it couldn't be different than yours. We had 3 new taxes that passed in November 2020. One of them was a CEO tax. We had a general business tax increase, and we also had a property transfer tax. So to think that in the heart of a pandemic, our legislative approach was to increase taxes, whereas yours obviously seems like it's the exact opposite. You know, how do you reconcile those two things? You know, they can't both be the right approach to attracting tech.
So I've got to be honest, we met for the first time, what, a couple of years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago in Boulder.
Yeah.
When we pulled a group of us together, and Alex Curtis traveled with me out there for that meeting. And after listening to what was going on in San Francisco and Seattle and New York, a few of these big cities, you know, we walked away thinking, man, we just, you know, how do we make sure that we don't follow in those footsteps? You know, certainly we've looked with envy at the strength of the tech industry on the West Coast and in San Francisco, but it's just a little mind-boggling to see what's happened since then. And I mean, what is it that why do your leaders feel that they can continue to tax the golden goose that is tech and not have ramifications from that?
All right, thanks, Brian. You got me live streaming this answer. So let me formulate my thoughts here. All right. So San Francisco, for starters, is an extremely civically engaged city. It is essentially the closest thing you have to direct democracy in anywhere in the United States. So you have the ability to put ballot measures on via signature, as well as via the minority of our board supervisors. So just to give everyone a little bit of context as joining today, you can have a ballot measure where you find yourself, and usually in most election years, upwards of 9,000 or 10,000 of your closest friends to sign a petition and put it to a vote. And we do that very, very frequently. We have over 20 set-asides that exist in our city budget, many of them due to petition-based measures that have been put on. The other thing is to put a ballot measure on from our board supervisors, which are essentially our city councilors. You only need 4 out of 11. So you do not even need the majority of city leadership to put something on the ballot. So when I say it's the closest thing to direct democracy, it means that you really don't need a consensus approach to put something to the vote in San Francisco. So with that, combined with the fact that we, of course, are increasingly a fairly progressive city, right? At this point, we have 11 board supervisors and a mayor. So there's 12 people essentially that are in charge of our city. A good 9 of those 11 supervisors are considered to be quite left-leaning, quite progressive, one of them being an actual registered Democratic Socialist. So to give you an idea of where politics are heading in San Francisco, we put our first registered Democratic Socialist on the Board of Supervisors 2 years ago, since 1974. So things are getting lefter and lefter and lefter, with mechanisms where it's actually quite easy to put these tax measures out. So one of our most famous tax measures in recent years, Prop C, which is the one where you may have heard it was a multi-$100 million tax that was going to go towards homelessness. We actually had various tech titans that ended up fighting over this tax publicly. There was literally a Twitter war that ended up happening. That was put on by signature. So it's very easy to tax people in this city. And it is a very, very political city. One last thing that I will note is that people take politics very seriously in San Francisco, and they say it's harder to run for a city supervisor seat in San Francisco than half of the House seats across America, which shows because 2 out of 3 of the most powerful people in leadership right now in the United States came from winning a seat in San Francisco, came from, small time politics, right?
So what a comparison of approaches.
Yeah.
So I put you on the spot with, having to answer that. Talk about the positive side. What has been over the years the secret to the success of the San Francisco tech industry and how it has grown and flourished?
So in one word, it's the people. It's 100% the people. And this, we all hear this, right? Every startup knows that up until, of course, now the pandemic may have changed this, but up until before the pandemic, if you wanted to get the best talent in the entire world, you knew that you had to find them in San Francisco. And so there's regularly bidding wars over our engineers. Like it is known as the place where the top of the top talent go. So that talent acquisition piece has been a huge, huge driver towards why you start a company and stay in San Francisco. And the other big driver, of course, is that, we had Sand Hill Road. And so the original venture capitalists from many decades ago have, up until recently, always kind of said, if you want to get money from us, we want you to be nearby. And that's why so many companies have been located in San Francisco and up and down the peninsula, because historically speaking, VCs wanted to have reach with you, to keep an eye on you, to help make sure that you're growing properly, to see where their dollar investments are going. I think that might have changed though. I think VCs have really opened their eyes towards the concept of remote environments. A lot of VCs we've spoken to, including Ron Conway, one of the most famous VCs on the planet, he said, at the end of the day, the VCs are going to go where the ideas are. So I do think that there's a really big opportunity to capture some of that momentum and the power of people in other places. And that's why I think it's really key that as you guys are having these exits and acquisitions or IPOs or whatever it might be, that your people are staying. Because if your founders leave, they're the ones that become those tentpole figures that fund the next 10 or 12, right? And then of that 10 or 12, one of them has an exit and becomes that next temple. And that's how you create that ripple effect. And so that longevity and keeping people there is really what has made San Francisco, San Francisco.
Yeah, that's great. So people and capital, that's to the top of the list. And I would agree with that, which is why, for as long as I'm five years into my role here, workforce and the talent has been our number one priority.
1, 2, 3.
Yep. It's, it is the future of economic development, because where the talent is, the companies will come. And honestly, that's why what's happening now is so risky to San Francisco. If the talent is exiting, that's going to have dramatic ramifications on the city.
Absolutely. And that's why everybody that's listening, that's why we did this poll, because we're curious to hear from you. What is it that you look for in the place where you want to live? Do you have to be in the amazing city by the bay? Do you need the views? I thought it was actually very interesting, some of the poll results here, because maybe some people just want a nice backyard with a nice big home. Perhaps that has become more valuable, especially as some of the tech workers are starting to start families, getting a little bit older. You're not 30 on your own in a 1-bedroom apartment anymore. The idea of being able to lay down roots, I think, is really starting to come to some people's minds, and that could have a big ripple effect on the remote workforce. So I've got one more questions for you, and then I see we've got a bunch piling to the Q&A, and a lot of people submitted some. So my last question for you is a good one. So according to Redfin, out-of-towners coming to Nashville had a home buying budget 48% higher than Nashville locals. So about $719,000 compared to $485,000. So with that huge budget difference, do you have concerns that these out-of-towners might come price out your locals? This is something that San Francisco has dealt with for years now, and it has become one of the core issues, housing affordability in our city. And so many people that were born in San Francisco can no longer afford to buy a home here. 70% of tech workers can't afford to buy a home in San Francisco. 82% of all San Francisco families can't afford to buy a home in San Francisco.
So at the crux of it, housing prices is simply a factor of supply and demand. And as the demand increases with an influx of people, then and the supply isn't keeping up, then prices are going to adjust. What we've seen happen here is, one, we make it easy to do business in Tennessee. As soon as these announcements about, Amazon and other Alliance Bernstein and other big announcements that have come in the past few years started hitting, the city reacted by streamlining the process for getting permits for building and really trying to make things as easy as possible for new building to take place. You mentioned a couple of statistics. I'll add a couple of others to that. So according to Rent Jungle, we did start seeing an increase in pricing of apartments. And so these are 2-bedroom, you were quoting 1-bedroom, but that actually topped out in April of 2019. So long before, a year before COVID hit, they topped out. And at that time, a 2-bedroom average rent was $1,600. And then they started to come back down again before COVID, because the supply started to catch up with the demand and we were able to level out the pricing. And so today for a 2-bedroom, that average price is about $1,455. The average home price in January was $347,000. You had a figure that was just over $300,000, and that's just for the month of January. There's about 5,000 units on the market right now, and there's thousands of other units that are queued up to come on. So we're trying to fight. That's part of the answer, but there still is that need and that issue, and the community is concerned about affordability. Amazon, one of our new companies, just committed $2 billion across 3 markets. Nashville being one of those markets to help with affordable housing. That's huge. We're seeing those companies and Alliance Bernstein working with other companies that have been here for a long time to really try to help address these issues. There's so much more to that, but
it sounds like, well, I mean, kudos to you all for understanding, right, what it means to have new folks be moving into town and to actually keep up with housing supply, right? Because in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, in the last 5 years, we've created 8 times as many jobs as housing units. So we have not kept up with that angle of things. And so obviously our housing affordability crisis stems from much deeper issues than just having more folks moving into the city, right? So with that being said, you want to get to some of the questions? I can start reading some of them out. We got a lot piling in.
Sure, let's see what we have.
Okay, anonymous attendee says, what are some of the unknown challenges one might not know about until they move to Nashville? For example, so many people move to Austin, and I highly doubt many thought about or knew about the power structure challenge.
Well, we don't have that, but
good stuff.
A couple of the challenges that depends on if it's a person or if it's a company that's coming to town. There's concerns about infrastructure, and so and that's all relative. Where as you add people, it adds congestion on the highways, and what my commute from the suburbs in the south up to where our office is in the city, might be 5 or 10 minutes longer than it was 2 or 3 years ago. Not that big a deal. People coming here from San Francisco, from New York, from LA, from Houston, or even Atlanta, look around and say, you don't have a traffic problem, but yet the perception is that we do, and that will probably only get worse if it's not addressed. And so that is something that there was a $5 billion mass transit initiative that was put on the ballot a few years ago that got voted down. There's another $1.5 billion initiative that did get approved at the very end of last year to try to address busing, and not nearly as comprehensive as the other one, but it is something that our leaders are trying to figure out the best way to address. So that's one thing that I would say that you might not know if you come here.
I mean, that kind of growing pain with people when it comes to moving them through the city with public transit options and highways and things like that. I think that's something we've seen time and time again. Austin, actually, to bring up Austin again, has seen a huge influx of people using their freeway, and it's same thing, right? And it sounds like you guys, again, are at least trying to keep ahead of the curve and seeing what's happened with other cities and trying to address it.
We are, and we're not perfect, and there's a long way to go with that, but it is something that certainly is a topic of discussion and solutions that we're trying to come up with.
Okay, so I have a quick, actually, question follow up to that. Do your cities and your state get along well? Do they talk to each other? Do they coordinate?
They do.
It's the blue dot in a red state.
It is the blue dot in the red state, and certainly there's some friction there. Generally speaking, I would say yes.
Okay.
There's been a little more recent friction. We don't have time to get into to what may have caused that, but generally speaking, I would say yes, because even with, I said, this stream of Democratic governors that are mayors that we've had, they've all been conservative in the way that they approached business, and so that hasn't been a point that needed to be debated. So generally speaking, I would say the answer to that is yes. We may have some other people that hop on here and say, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about," but that's my impression.
Okay. Do you think that will be a rub at all for the incoming tech culture?
I don't. What I'm seeing from the city leaders, state leaders, people in economic development, other business leaders in the community, is that they're embracing the high-paying jobs that these tech companies are bringing. It's adding to our economy. They're buying goods. A lot of our when you don't have an income tax, a lot of our taxes come from sales tax, and they're buying things, and that's generating tax revenue, and so that's good. Generally speaking, I think that they're embracing this as long as we can keep up with the infrastructure needs, and we don't start to see negatives there. There has been, and you mentioned something that some of the people in San Francisco are worried about, losing the culture and what made San Francisco, San Francisco. I hear that talk here. I'm not a native. I've been here for 21 years. I feel like, I'm a part of the city, but I hear that concern. We don't want Nashville to become the next San Francisco or the next Silicon Valley. We want Nashville to be the best Nashville it can be.
Yep.
And my observation is that the people moving here are coming because they embrace this culture and they want to be a part of it, not that they want to come here and change it. And I hope that continues to play out, because that's what I'm seeing, and I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we've got a few more. Here's an interesting question from Shelby. As a Nashville resident, she's wondering if you have any concerns about the current city administration's attitude towards business.
Now that's a setup question.
What are your thoughts around the current city administration's attitudes towards business?
So we have our third mayor in 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Mayor Cooper came in with, and within a very short while, we were hit. We forget that before COVID was a devastating tornado that ripped through the city and leveled huge parts of the city. Wow. So within a very short while of taking office, he had to deal with the devastating effects of the tornado, and then COVID hit, and all of the very difficult decisions that, at a city level and at a state level were having to be made. There were economic pressures that he inherited when he came in. We could debate all day long if the way that those have been dealt with are the right way to do it, but He comes from a business background, and we thought was going to be incredibly supportive of the business. He had some other priorities first. He indicated that he was going to back away from some of the incentives that had been paid to try to entice companies to move to Nashville. That was not, that concerned some in the business community.
Yep.
There have been some recent indications that maybe his administration might be open to those discussions again, but maybe in a different way or a limited way. So I guess I would answer that question by saying I'm hopeful. There's been some extenuating circumstances over the past year since he's taken office, and I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to manage through that and continue this this trend that we've seen of being a very business-friendly city.
Well spoken, Brian. Well spoken indeed. All right, so a few other quick questions. So Cliff was wondering how the Nashville tech community works with Vanderbilt and other higher ed institutions. And then we actually had another person chimed on with a similar question. Do Nashville tech employers care where they're recruiting from? I.e., do they recruit from the local universities? So curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, what you might not realize if you're from out of town is that Nashville is the third largest college town in the country. There's 125,000 students here, but they're spread over 20 different universities. I mean,
wow.
I did not realize that. Obviously, Vanderbilt has the highest profile. MTSU is the largest in the area, but there's a whole bunch of universities here, which makes for a lot of diversity in the types of students. Our first effort at workforce development, which dates back to 2010, 2011, 2012, was a program in conjunction with the local chamber to establish IT advisory boards with all of our colleges and universities, so that we could provide feedback from the business community to make sure that the skills of the students that they were graduating met the needs of our local employers. So we've seen a lot of interest in hiring local graduates. We just did a survey. It concluded last week, and 46% of our member companies said they were in hiring mode, and the vast majority of those said they were looking to hire either entry level or mid level, with like 20% saying they were also looking to hire senior level people. So there's still a large appetite, if you want to use that survey as an indication, to hire these entry level people. And where one of our challenges is making sure that, let's just use Vanderbilt as an example, that these students that for the most part come from out of town to attend Vanderbilt realize what the opportunities are in Nashville, and that they don't have to leave in order to have a great tech career.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the $1 million question. Let's be honest, right? Everybody is trying to prevent brain drain and even see some sort of brain gain. And up until recently, it's really seemed like you were up against New York or maybe Boston and definitely San Francisco. But now there's the Nashvilles and the Austins and the Miamis. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I have one last question I'll cover. And somebody asked, according to Axios' latest report, that the exodus from San Francisco has been to the suburbs, and to elaborate more on that. And yes, thus far, there have been a lot of folks that have left San Francisco and gone to kind of other areas of the Bay Area, Sacramento and places like that definitely saw a bit of a boom. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because obviously people have spent the last year in their homes, right? So if you have to work in a home environment, you definitely need more space than the 1 or 2 bedroom apartment that you might have had in an urban setting. With many of those companies set to reopen their offices come July 1st or so, I think it will be telling to see how many folks decide to stay in those suburb environments versus how many want to move back into the city when they have accessibility to those offices again. So All right, Brian, this is the last question I will ask. You have a very engaged audience. What is your pitch to move to Nashville? What would your pitch be for the Nashville tech industry while everybody is listening?
So we've covered this to a certain extent, but really you've got no state income tax. You have a very affordable life, living expenses here. It's a great quality of life. You have a creative ecosystem that's really second to none that you can get plugged into. And it's an ecosystem that's small enough to where you can move here and have an impact and really really grow in a special way and affect the future of Nashville's tech scene. I don't think you find that combination anywhere else, and we would love to have you.
Big fish in a little pond?
Well, you could say it like that, yeah.
No, that's amazing. You're not going to just be another number, another name on the roster of a giant VC firm's list, right? You can really be a person that makes a difference in a city and builds a new ecosystem. So with that being said,
launching real quick, we're launching a new initiative called Tech into Nashville. So look for techintonashville.com. It's not up and running yet. It is in design. It will be in the next few weeks. That will tell the story of why you would want to move to Nashville. It's specifically designed to do that.
I love it. All right, Brian, it's been a treat to chat. I hope the next time we do it in person, ideally in a beautiful, idyllic mountain-like setting like last time.
Yeah, Jen, thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you. All right, everyone, we will share the recording out soon. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.